Hello and welcome to a special episode of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and for the first time, we're on video. So despite the disappointing end to the season, we thought we'd try something new and a bit exciting just to rev spirits up heading into, hopefully, a positive season next year. And with me to discuss the disappointing game and season, but also to look ahead, I have Dan.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good. And I've also got Logan. How are you, Logan?
Hey guys, how you doing? Good.
Yeah, I'll start with you, Dan, just on the Cardiff game itself. And I guess there was that sort of sense of inevitability about it that, probably after that Luton defeat, there was that sense that it was going to be pretty tough to stay up. And, sure enough, things didn't turn in our favour. How did you feel kind of going into that game and sort of how it panned out? Did you it just went as expected?
Yeah, look, pretty much. I think anytime you go into a game and you need 3 or 4 other results to go in your favour, it's never really a good position to be in. So, I think it sort of went as expected. Apart from I was a bit disappointed. I thought we would have shown a little more fight, given the position that we were in, but. Pretty much as expected. No real surprises in how it all played out for me.
And I guess even the most disappointing fact of how expected it was in terms of the lineup. Logan, the fact that Lewis Potter again didn't manage to get a start, it sort of contrasts a little bit with that Premier League relegation where we saw Bowen start against Spurs, and you sort of got that hope as a supporter of, okay, well, we've got these kids coming through that might carry us next season. We didn't even get that with Lewis Potter starting against Cardiff.
Yeah, absolutely. And even beyond just this Cardiff game in isolation, is Ken Lewis Potter was probably one of the bright sparks, particularly at the start of the season when he kind of came into the fold, and he really filled the supporters with huge levels of optimism. And to kind of just see how he fizzled out, mainly because he was used so sparingly. Not only points to how disappointing it was in the Cardiff fixture, but also beyond just that last game itself.
Yeah, definitely. And in the game itself, Dan, I guess our brightest chance came. We were already 1-0 down, but Wilkes played into the box. Pretty clear penalty not given, and it sort of follows on from that non-red card decision against Luton as well. It just, as much as those decisions probably wouldn't have kept us up in the end, it's still disappointing and frustrating not to get the rub of the green.
Yeah, apart from the penalty in that game against Cardiff, there's only one real other chance I can think of was bounced around, and then Wilkes had a bit of a half volley or something that was pushed away by Smithies. But I think we've talked about it before where we've had these runs where we can't seem to get any decisions or any results our way, where when you're in a bit of a bad rut and you've got bad luck, it just seems to compound week after week. And the previous week with what should have been a red card for the violent conduct, and then it's the most blatant penalty I've seen that's not been given in a very long time. Like you see that Wilkes clear, like the knee's out, he falls just about straight over his leg. He's beaten by, like, the defender's beaten by a good bit of skill to play the ball around him. It was just, I'm baffled and bewildered at the inability of either referee to have noticed that.
Yeah, and you can't even give them an out because it was pretty, it was on that linesman's side. There was no obstruction. It was a pretty clear decision. And even thinking back, there was the penalty given for us against Wigan that was then swiftly taken away. So we couldn't even get any luck in that one either. Logan, what did you make of that? And I guess our chances in the game as a whole?
Yeah, I think that Dan's already kind of touched on it. Not only did it seem like a game that was a dead rubber, we kind of the low expectations we had for it. I think the performance, if you kind of got asked to predict the score, I reckon 2 or 3-0 Cardiff before the performance, probably pretty close to what you would have gone with. And regardless of the fashion, I don't think we really looked like we were causing them too many problems with attack. We had very few chances apart from the penalty, and still just incredibly open defensively. It just highlights the fragilities that have been there for the entire year, really. ever since the kind of the last result and the back end of Christmas. It's just been a horrible 2020 for us. And this performance was exactly what we expected.
And then, I mean, we'll move on from the game and talk about the season as a whole in a second. But I guess the last aspect of this game I wanted to touch on was McGann's post-game comments. Don't really endear himself to the supporters, I would have thought. Dan, I mean, he's sort of talking about the fact that, bigger clubs than us have gone down, which is an easy way to get people off base if you want to remind people or suggest to people that the club's a certain size. And, saying that he's here for the long haul and he's up for the challenge and he's going to try and turn the club around. I mean, it seems as if there's been no word from the owners, and we'll talk about them in a second, but it seems as if he's going to be the manager next season.
Yeah, it's I really don't understand why he would come out and say those sorts of things with everything that's been going on around the club and all the talk. Despite the actions being completely against that, all the talk has been all year, all season long about trying to repair that broken relationship, and to come out and essentially just it's salt in the wound for all of us fans to be told that I mean we see ourselves as a reasonably sized club. We're not a huge club, but we're certainly not a small club. But to essentially be treated in that or spoken about in that way by our own manager is pretty disgusting. And it's not like we only we went out with a whimper. He has no. I can't see any bearing in how he could be assured that he is there for the long haul, regardless of what he's been told. Because I'm pretty sure someone asked the Alan Ehab about it months ago, and as predictably as always, he refused to be drawn into whether or not McCann would stay or go, or on how the season finished. So just another one that it blows my mind that you could be so disrespectful to the club, to the fans that employ you.
Yeah, and Logan, I mean, we're record setters in one sense. It's 6 points from our last 20 games. It's, I think, the worst end to a championship season ever. And you've just got to question how McGann still has a job after that when you see managers go for a whole lot less.
Absolutely, and I think that's been a question that has been asked time and time again through the closing month from the fans, and I imagine some other levels of the club are also thinking along the same lines. All you have to do is take a look at the initiative that Middlesbrough made to get themselves out of the relegation zone. They went and made a really good appointment, and in that they found themselves out of the fold relatively easily. And the fact that there was no real proactive measures made at all, it was almost like watching a car crash in slow motion. There was no real optimism from the fans, and even from the players. It was really hard, as you mentioned, with a return of 6 points from 20 games. And you kind of saw, even with the COVID break, that we knew we were in trouble, and there had been time to kind of plan for these things, but it was just in no way, shape or form did we do anything to even attempt to resurrect that slide. And just on what Dan said as well, I think that McCann, when he made that comment, how he kind of touched on how the owner's been fantastic and they've supported him all the way. I think that it doesn't do anything to even alleviate some of the frustrations that the fans had been feeling, particularly on a relegation day when emotions are at their highest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and look, we've seen in the last few days the outrage towards the owners just getting expressed across social media. We saw the protests outside the ground after the Luton game. I think interestingly, and I think Logan, you were talking about this before we went to air, the fact that the owners and also the players haven't really made any kind of comments after the relegation was confirmed. You see, the teams that were relegated from the Premier League, players have come out and not necessarily apologized, which isn't necessarily something that they need to do, but they've come out and made kind of comments about thanking the fans, giving encouraging signs for next season and what will go on. and it's just been radio silence from City. So it's been a pretty interesting one. I think Ehab's gone off on holidays, which isn't hugely surprising. But Logan, what have you made of that sort of situation with the players and that sort of disconnect?
Well, I think that it speaks a lot to the toxic culture that exists there at the moment, which we've talked about a lot recently. But even we had the article come out from SBS as well with that interview with Jackson Irvine and the manner that he was let go. And I think something along the lines of there was 7 or 14 days before the season resumed, and he hadn't even heard from the club. And that is bewildering that something where, he's even captained us this year, for communication levels to be so low with even him, that probably gives us some sort of insight as to how the players felt about the situation in the relegation fight. Being a City fan, we're no stranger to a relegation fight, and we know what it takes to kind of overcome. And you do need a team that's galvanised. You do need all levels of the club to kind of be working in unison to have any chance of being able to hold off and emotionally be able to cop the nerves and the gall that's required to stay up. What also upset me more was some of the most outspoken people were ex-City players. We saw Caleb Foley come out. We saw David Myler come out and tweet. And to have people of that magnitude be speaking so openly in forums, yet to not have really heard anything from any of the City players itself, I think it just shows us everything that we kind of feared, and it leaves us in this position where there's no reasonable doubt as to why we do find ourselves in the League One situation.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I can understand from one perspective that current players can't really speak ill about their employers and that sort of thing, but you'd expect at some level that the players could still issue some sort of tweet or some sort of message to the supporters to sort of galvanize us for next season. And it as you say, it sort of just adds to that toxicity where there's already that feeling that the owners don't care about the club, that there's players there who don't necessarily care about the club for one reason or another. They could be loanees, they could be on the last year of their deals, that sort of thing. But no one's really doing anything to suggest otherwise or to encourage any other train of thought. And look, you mentioned there the article with Jackson back here in Australia, interviewed by the World Game. And Dan, I'll bring you in on this one as well. That look, it was essentially just confirming what we suspected with Irvine, which was, player in the last year of his deal being asked to play on for 6 weeks after his deal technically expired, putting himself at risk that if he sustained a serious injury, that he would be without a club through his rehabilitation. And, Irvine talked about the fact that he asked that question of the club, that if he sustained a serious injury, would they trigger that year extension on his deal? And he was told in no uncertain terms that no, they wouldn't. And, you can say what you want about, well, we've got to manage players on a League One budget, potentially that sort of thing. But it's pretty brutal and damning to see that in black and white, that the club isn't standing by its players. And you come back to, well, that's probably why a lot of the players aren't standing by the club.
Yeah, it is really disappointing. I think just on sort of all of this, that's the only social media I've seen has basically been from Will Mannion saying, thanks for the last 4 years, and a couple of players, wishing him the best. Which that in itself, that's another. I'm sure we'll talk about those players in a while, but it's just sad that none of the players were. I don't know whether they're allowed or whether they're willing to say anything. I don't want them. I'm sure you guys don't either necessarily to apologize and say, sorry, we let you guys down, but just as you mentioned, just anything, just to say, we recognize what's happened, but we're ready to work hard and try and win promotion from League One next year. It's bloody 40 characters on Twitter, and it may not mean much, but it kind of does really. And I think that speaks to, I think something I wanted to bring up was the incident with Tafazoli after the Luton game.
Yeah,
it's the same sort of thing. It's really highlighted that for whatever reason, whether it's a hierarchical thing and it's coming all the way down through the club, or maybe it's just that toxic culture, but there's no one who's actually really standing up on the field or off the field, apart from Ryan in this instance, to stand up and be counted or take account for anything. You know, of all the players, he's probably of the match day on that day has probably played the least minutes of anyone there, and he's the one who's got the balls to come out, face up to angry protesting fans, and say, you know, we are trying and we are hurting. Please, like, bear with us. But, you know, Device, the captain, other guys who are there are just, sure, are they crying in the change rooms? Go cry in front of the fans. That like, it will mean way more than having someone tell you that you're crying. If you go out and show that emotion, like, I don't know. I guess it's just a culture thing or something that's going on there at the moment. But I think in terms of leadership, that's one area where we're really struggling at the moment, particularly after losing Lehigh and Irvine.
Yeah, and look, and you mentioned there Mannion, and you know, we did release our retained list. I think it was earlier this week, and Logan, we've let go somewhat predictably Kevin Stewart and John Terrell, but also Will Mannion and Rob McKenzie. McKenzie, probably of the four, the one I was the most surprised to see released, purely because he at least can operate down that right-hand side. And given the fact that we don't even have any senior right backs, to be releasing a junior right, I mean, look, he's also playing centre back or centre midfield as well. But what did you make of that released list and the players that we've let go? And I guess also the news that we've offered McDonald a new contract.
Yeah, I guess Stuart leaving was no real surprise. I think he was our highest earner, and obviously given the climate of the club and the communication that we are operating under a League One budget, essentially, to see Stuart go was inevitable. I think, as you mentioned, McKenzie leaving. McKenzie hasn't done all that much to kind of endear himself to the fans. I think he's had the occasional okay game, but he has been called upon in pretty critical moments over the last couple of seasons when someone's got injured. He's come in and hasn't really cemented his place. He has been kind of put in as a makeshift right back, centre back, just to fill kind of voids at certain times. So to see him go, as you mentioned, surprising player that doesn't really have a huge profile but has been at the club for quite some time, makes it interesting. John Terrell, we know, we've seen the gifts and the abilities that he does have, but he's just had a horrible run of injuries. To take a punt on him, and also, I guess, from his perspective, would he go back and play League One? It's somewhat one of those speculative ones, but I don't think there's any huge surprises with that. I also think it's one of those interesting kind of dilemmas we find ourselves in. What does preparing for League One look like? We have to remember this club hasn't played League One football for a decade or more. And so I guess the frustration that I got from Caleb Folan as well in his tweet is he said the amount of effort that's gone in to build this club, to get it to a point where it's a so-called yo-yo club, where a relegation for us is back to the championship, to just let it slip so easily into League One, it doesn't just undo the work of a poor season, but it actually undoes a lot of work from the last decade and beyond of the people who have really worked tirelessly to get the club where it was and experience some of the things that we've been able to see over the last 10, 12 years. And that kind of is the overarching thing that leaves such a bit of a taste in, I think, a lot of the fans' mouths at the moment, is we've fallen from grace so far that we don't really have a rescue plan. There isn't a package of recovery. And with all of the communication that does come out of the clubs, like, we can sit here and speculate about what signings we could get next season. But at the end of the day, we're now looking at a totally different level of players, a totally different tier of pooled players, where if you're not going to make the effort to try and negotiate with someone like Jackson Irvine, who I believe was a £2 million signing, then what's next? What's on the horizon for the type of player that we can expect to get in, particularly in a League One where it is going to be an incredibly tough league, and we don't underestimate that. we need grafters. We need players who can actually cut it at that level. And it definitely looks like a very different brand of football that we've been used to seeing over the last long period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at Sunderland, who are still down in League One. You look at Portsmouth. You look at other clubs that have slipped from the Premier League down to the Championship and then down to League One. It's not the easiest league to get out of. It's not a league where we can look at it and necessarily say that we're going to bounce straight back up. Granted, there was a good stat that I saw, which was that I think our current squad has 99 League One goals in it, presumably most of that being Eves. But we do have some players in that squad now who do suddenly become big fish in that pond. But we did have a Facebook question from Mark who was asking, can we expect the same routine of signings in terms of bringing in those cheap loanees, free players, last minute signings? Dan, do you sort of look at the squad that we've got and think that with just a couple of additions, like Logan's saying, I mean, you look at the fact that our average age against Cardiff was just 25 compared to Cardiff's 29. We've got a squad of kids, essentially. We need some of these older guys, even if it's just a sprinkling, to add that little bit of energy and grafting, as Logan said.
Yeah, I think we were talking about all this previous season about we're desperate for just one or two, extra real senior heads who had a real decent level of experience at championship level, and going back to League One now, we are looking. We need that same thing. We need some with an average age of 25 in that squad. We really need a couple of guys who are in that at 30, 31. A couple of guys around that who still have a good few years left in them, but who have the experience and the mental know-how and the mental capacity to really guide a young team around the park, particularly like through the spine. I think a really solid centre half would go good. Someone, that like 29, 30-year-old sort of a centre half would go great. Yeah. And someone like, if Device or Burke do actually end up staying, I think they would benefit immensely from having that extra experience with them, which we've seen with, like, say, when Maguire came through, had experienced guys with him who really helped him lift his game. And then, we've all seen what he's gone on to achieve. So,
I was going to ask the question for you then. You mentioned Device there. It wasn't even in the squad against Cardiff. Do you think he'll hang around? Do you think that there might be already offers in the wings, whether he just doesn't have it in him to drop down to League One, or how do you see that one panning out?
I think Device will be one that other clubs will look at. I think he has shown plenty of potential in the couple of seasons in the Championship. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are clubs that are looking at him, even maybe some of the freshly promoted Championship clubs to the Championship, or some of those mid-tables. Someone even someone like Middlesbrough or something might be looking at a strong centre half. But I think what's going to count against some of these players is the last 6 months.
Yeah,
because they've, like, realistically, our whole squad has been poor for 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted out, I think it was during the Cardiff game, I sort of tweeted out and said, you can't really, none of those players can really look at City and say that they're too good to play in League One when they're the reason that we've dropped into League One. And it's, like you're saying, none of them showed that quality over that 6 months to show that they were better than that.
Yeah, I think based purely on, let's say, pedigree, in that where they've come from and what they've done, in their youth. But Device, coming from Eindhoven, Burke coming from West Ham, and I guess the only other one who I can really think would be De Silva, but that's only because he already had offers in this season and he'd only been playing a Championship for 6 months at the time. So apart from that, I can't really think of anyone who's really stood out at all that much to warrant, being poached away from us. But I mean, they do call it the silly season for a reason. So who knows what will eventuate. But yeah, I think in terms of what kind of signings we will get, I don't see us bucking the trend. It probably will be loan signings and, whoever we can get on, cheap wages on a free transfer. Those are the kind of players we will probably recruit because of the fiscal positioning that the Allams are trying to place, negotiate the club around.
Logan, do you sort of see either a chance to bring in a couple of players or even like we're sort of saying there that potentially not many of the players would attract a higher club, but if it is a matter of needing to balance the books and cut wages and that sort of thing, do you see a George Long getting sold to a Wickham or someone like that? Or do you sort of see any players that we'd be looking to shed from the squad?
I don't think that's kind of what Dan mentioned. I don't really think there's a player in the squad that has a huge level of security that the club are desperate to hold on to. It seems to be that revolving door policy with the arms that it doesn't matter who the player is. It's more just about shedding wages. And the strange thing is you touched on before, is we've got Eves and we've got Wilkes as well, who in League One should be relatively prolific. At least the track records would suggest that to offer. So as far as strengthening the squad goes, we probably aren't in the market for a striker. But although with saying that, you've always got a place in your side for a 10 to 15 goal a season kind of type player that would definitely strengthen us to join those two. But beyond that, I don't see anybody that the club would see as indispensable. And I think that there's going to be a lot of changes between now and when the League One season does come around. But players to be targeting, again, it's a totally different world for City and what they find themselves in. And reality is we are just becoming so used to this really stringent policy or transfer policy that the Allams hold. So we're merely guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, another element to look ahead to for the next season is obviously we've had a lot of chopping and changing of the captaincy. I think in the last year alone, off the top of my head, we started off with Henriksen and then we went to Lehigh, then to Irvine, and finally I guess it was sort of Elder, and then Elder started against Cardiff, didn't he? And then he went off injured. So he essentially held the captaincy to the end of the season, which, as I sort of mentioned last week, it was kind of nice that we had two different Aussie captains during the season. Logan, I'll start with you on this one. And I guess it sort of feeds into what we've just been saying, but is there anyone that really jumps out at you as being a natural successor to the captaincy at the club?
Absolutely not. I think outside of probably as Dan mentioned, like Tafazzoli going and confronting the fans and showing some level of kind of regret, I guess, or somber feelings. I think that's probably the only real leadership trait we've seen from anybody. I guess one of the other ones that you could debate is probably Honeyman, given the fact that he's got a bit of pedigree, previously having held that role at Sunderland. And I think that, he's maybe the type of player that they would consider, a leadership style that could come into that mentor role. But
in his defence, he's captained us one game for one win.
Yeah.
Was that Honeyman against? Was he captain against Borough?
Yeah. And so I guess when you consider factors like that, there might be an argument to be made for someone like him taking that role. But I mean, what I think really needs to happen is we almost need to blow the thing up and start again in so many ways. And as Dan alluded to before, it's the signings for us probably look like having some old heads, having someone come in from another club who isn't currently in such a toxic environment and can come in and give a renewed perspective to not just the playing group, but I also think the coaches and the people around the club who are probably feeling the effects of a toxic club for an extended period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, what are your thoughts on it? I mean, the name that probably leaps to mind, other than the ones that we've just mentioned there, is maybe Magennis. I mean, we sort of talked about the fact that since the restart, he's been a pretty vocal and sort of held a bit of a leadership role amongst the team. But yeah, no one else really comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Magennis with that game, he got subbed off, and then they said he was sitting in the stands and was still the only voice, the City voice that they could hear. So Yeah, I'm not sure. I think, maybe, I guess it's probably one of, I would probably go if Elder, Honeyman, or Magennis. I mean, as much as we, sort of ragged on Magennis a little bit at the start of the season because of his 2 red cards in quick succession, he was at least, foot to the floor, going at it, trying to do something for City at the time. So, I'm not sure. It'll be an interesting one to see how that pans out. But there's just such a lack of experience really across that whole squad, and a lack of clear leadership just makes this such a difficult one to put a pin in, really.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, this is all assuming that Device does leave, but I think that's sort of.
Could that be a case made for Tom Eaves in the captaincy role in any way? He's proven at that level, I guess, and in some ways, when he's come on and played patches, he does seem to have some level of energy and certainly a care factor. Whether that translates to that leadership role, I'm not so sure. What I found really interesting with this particular playing group is, as a fan, it's really hard to kind of resonate or get alongside. I think that we're used to having players at the club like your David Milers and even younger players in the sense of like Robbie Brady and Stephen Quinn and guys who really cared. Paul McShane, Alex Bruce, any of these guys could have stepped into that role because as a fan, you really resonated with them and felt connected to them. And this particular playing group, I think it's such a difficult one to be aligned with because it seems so fickle and they're in one week, they're out the next. We're getting thrashed and they seem to be walking back to halfway without a care in the world. And it's things like that I think as a fan really distance yourself from being able to make these educated decisions as to who you would like to see in that particular role.
Yeah, no, and that's a fair point as well. So it's. And I guess that's the saddest thing is that it seems as if there's this big disconnect that's sort of growing between the fans and the club. And I think it's this revolving door of players that we don't have. I mean, our longest serving player now, look, I'm struggling to think of who it would be because, Irvine was the longest serving player for a little while. And it's going to be, I can't even think of it. Maybe Burke or Elder, Burke or Device, I think might be. Or Long, I don't know. But it's, this revolving door just means that there's no connection that gets grown with the players. You look at, like you were saying before, we saw Myler and others on social media after the games expressing their disappointment at the situation the club's finding itself in. And those are the personalities that you identify with the club. And there's not many players in the current squad that you kind of see as being quintessentially City players because they're sort of in for a season or two and then they're straight back out again. So look, I mean, we're saying, it's going to be a tough season next year in League One, but if we can make a couple of signings, who knows? I mean, in this last portion of the podcast, I wanted to look back just before we stop looking ahead to the season to come. What's your sense of where we'll finish next season, Dan? Do you see us as challenging for promotion? Do you see it as a consolidation season, or do you see it as another relegation fight?
I don't think we shouldn't find ourselves in a relegation fight. I think even as poor as they have been for us this year, they get it. Well, I mean, they have already had a chance to reset, and that didn't go well. But they get a chance to reset. Theoretically, we're going up against, weaker or, less technically gifted or however you want to spin it, opposition in the coming season. I think we do have enough ability to compete and be reasonably strong. I don't see it. I think there's still a lack of tactical strength, I think, on McCann's behalf that I don't think we'll be, an automatic promotion position. I think we'll probably struggle to make the playoffs, but I think we'll be pretty comfortable within the league.
Logan, how do you say it?
Yeah, similar, but I think it largely hinges the ownership. I think if the club was to be sold in this next period before the league began, I think that instantly you'd see a renewed optimism amongst the fans, potentially the playing group, And also, I guess that what that would also do is open up more bargaining power for going into the transfer window. I mean, we have this mentality as City fans that, we're a, ex-Premier League championship club, but given the drastic demise, I'm not sure that other players would look at this club as a place to go to that offers, a huge amount of hope. They consider the crowd numbers prior to COVID, obviously, the revolving door with managers, the players' contracts aren't safe. I mean, if you were to talk to some of the current playing group and you hear the horror stories about how they've been negotiated with, it doesn't fill you with much hope to want to go, that's the type of club that I obviously want to go and run my. So
Yeah.
if there was to be a club sale, I think that given if they're able to change the kind of the squad mentality, I think that we could definitely push for the playoffs. I think that if things aren't to change, then I can't see how we could position ourselves any higher than sort of mid-table.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. I think it will be interesting being in League One where the KCOM's probably one of the biggest stadiums in the league. Obviously, there's the Stadium of Light there as well, but we will be seen as one of the bigger clubs in that sense, at least, that we know we're in a more modern stadium where, in League One, you go to some of the grounds and they're going to be 10, 15,000 capacity and pretty old ramshackle sort of grounds. So we're a bigger club in that sense, but you're completely right as well that with the way that the squad's been stripped down and stripped away, that any sort of luster around the former Premier League status is well and truly gone at this stage. So look, it'll be an exciting season, if nothing else, because it's something new. First time in 16 years that we're down there. But, it's going to be a really, really interesting start to the season. I think it's going to be a very interesting first month or so of the season to see how we hit the ground and whether we can get off to a decent enough start. But I thought we'll finish off with a slightly more positive look back at the season that we've just had. And I wanted to get from each of you your favourite moment of the season, as fleeting as it probably was, as few as there are to pick from. But Dan, if you've got something that comes to mind as a favourite moment of the season just past, I'll start with you.
Probably a couple of options come to mind for me. One is Keane Lewis-Potter scoring goals. That's which either of them. I think the one against Charlton's got counted as an own goal from a Charlton player or something, which got chalked away from him, which is disappointing. But I think that was a really good goal by Keane Lewis-Potter. The other one, which contextually was frustrating and disappointing, but the 4-4 at Swansea.
Yep.
We were in and out and up and down, and then to score the last two goals in the last 5 minutes or whatever it was to level that up. Eve scoring in the 94th minute as well or something, and running around with his shirt off, and that was that at that time gave me a little bit of hope that we might be turning it around. Obviously, it didn't eventuate, but that was a.
Did both of Wilkes and Maddison score in that game, if I'm remembering correctly, or maybe just Maddison?
I think so.
I'm just thinking because obviously that was a game that was just after those guys came into the club. So you're right. It sort of gave you that bit of optimism that I think we hadn't scored too many goals, and then to suddenly score 4 against Swansea, and particularly to have Maddison or potentially Wilkes as well on the score sheet would have been a pretty a good confidence boost.
Yeah, give me.
While you're looking for that,
Lopez, Maddison, Wilkes, and Eves.
Yeah, there you go. So Maddison and Wilkes both scoring. So that was a pretty positive result, even if we weren't able to get the 3 points, 4 points. Logan, what was your favourite memory of the season?
I think I have two, and one of them ended up being extremely underwhelming. Is that probably that 2-1 victory against Middlesbrough in the last couple of rounds, just because I'd forgotten what it was like to win, and it really did kind of put us in the driver's seat to stay up, I guess, at that point in time. And so I was largely optimistic. Apart from that, I think it was the 4-0 against Preston. I think Bowen got a double, maybe Grzycki scored. And And that was kind of when those two were at the height of their powers, and really we had that feeling that that this season, kind of from nothing, had resulted in a playoff push, and we started to get really excited. So they're probably the two moments that really stand out. But I tell you what, you've got to go back a long way to really remind yourself of what it's like, to the positive feeling of being a City fan, because it has just been a horrific year. It's the fact that we have to go back that far to remember the good times. It's largely disappointing.
Oh, it's crazy actually, because I was just thinking about what my favorite memory of the season probably is, and it is funny because of the fact that we had this COVID shutdown. It does almost feel like it's two different seasons, and for us more so than most clubs, I suspect, because of just how distinctly different our form was. I mean, it was starting to get pretty poor just before the shutdown, but that 3-0 win at Fulham was, especially in hindsight now, you're looking at them as a playoff semi-finalist. Potentially finalist, and we went there and just completely dismantled them. And yes, it was again, Bowen and Grzycki at the peak of their powers, but it just shows what this season could have been. And I mean, we've all sort of come up with two, and because my second would be that the Chelsea FA Cup game, not necessarily because of the game itself, but the lead up to that game where it was essentially a sellout KCOM. It was, Premier League opposition back in Hull. It was, almost a best, the strongest our team was all season. And there was that sense of optimism going into that game, because I think we'd lost or dropped points in a few games leading up to it. But that was right after we'd come within touching distance of the playoffs. And there was that real tangible belief that we were actually in a playoff battle. And, obviously everything just went downhill after that game. And I think it was the Huddersfield game was right after that. And then Bowen and Grzycki were gone. But that was probably the last game where, and it could be the last game for a number of years, where we really feel like a whole club, and a club with that connection to those Premier League players.
Yeah. I think one more that I just remembered going back through the archives was the FA Cup game against Rotherham, the comeback. With Eves' hat trick. I think that was kind of a sneaky one that I guess with the position we found ourselves in the league that time, we weren't too concerned about the FA Cup. But given the fact that we fell behind early, and then Eves, who is a pretty passionate player, to see him get a hat trick, having gone through a pretty barren patch, it kind of gave us that feeling that maybe Eves is going to start to get hot and score some goals as well. But obviously, we look back from hindsight now and realize that certainly wasn't the story.
Who can forget his famous post-match comments about kicking the wife out of the bed? He was sleeping with the match ball.
If nothing else, he's a great character. And look, I mean, we've said already. I mean, I'm hoping that heading into League One, he can really light the league up next year and really find some scoring touch, because it's funny with those players sometimes with the way it's such a mental thing that. If he can have a fantastic season for us in League One, and if we were to get promoted, he could have a great season back in the Championship, because you sort of start to get that momentum going. And as soon as you stop that toxicity, that rot that sort of sets in, if we can have, even if it's just a consolidation season and then push on, that there's a few opportunities there with the players that we have. But just before we head off, just as a last one, we sort of talked over the lockdown, Dan, about who our player of the season would be. And obviously, we've had a few games since that might not necessarily have changed the opinion. But I guess now with the whole season in the books, starting with you, Dan, have you any thoughts to who your player of the season would be? And I suspect I would say we're allowed to nominate players that might not have played the full season for us. If we have to.
I'm going to be honest, I don't even remember who I suggested in that episode.
I think we settled on Device, but I can't remember.
Yeah, we could well have. I couldn't possibly, after the last 8 games, I couldn't possibly keep him as a player of the season. He's just been so disappointing, as have many others. It's real. It comes back to, look, the number 20 is behind me on the wall. I honestly, you should have given me that out, because I can't pick anyone else apart from Jared Bowen.
I think Rick.
and he left in January. It's so disappointing.
Yeah, Rick did a player of the season poll on Twitter, and I think Bowen won against not Device. He won against Lopez in the final in an absolute landslide. So, Logan, are you looking past Bowen, or is he sort of the number one option?
I can't see how, when you've got a team that's collected 6 points from 20 games. I hate seeing all those nostalgic posts of when a player gets signed to a Premier League club and the fans still go on and on about it in the forums, and look how well Robinson's going, and we get smacked with the Liverpool propaganda. I do hate that stuff, and the fact that Jared Bowen is a West Ham player, even though that hurts us to say. What's happened this year that has done anything to dislodge him from our player of the season? And the answer is absolutely nothing. So by landslide, yep, he's the guy.
Yeah. The most depressing stat that I think I saw for this half of the season is, do either of you know who the top scorer at the KCOM is in 2020?
Who scored multiple goals?
It's not a Hull player. It's not a City player. Ben Rama at Brentford has scored 3 goals at the KCOM, and he is the top goal scorer at the KCOM in 2020. And that's the most depressing stat I think I've seen.
And what he would edge Wilkes out, who has 2.
Yeah. Because I think Wilkes scored against Middlesbrough, and then I guess there must have been one more. Yeah.
That's what a way to finish the podcast.
What a way to finish the podcast. Yeah, I just did have that thought. I thought it's a real nice positive way to finish it. But look, anyway, it's been an interesting season, and look, we finished the season off with a live stream episode, which was a great initiative and a great thing to try out. So I think we're going to try and do these once a month into the new season, potentially more often, depending on how successful they are. Look, it's almost a flashback to our early days of the podcast, Logan, where we used to do the monthly roundup of the matches. We can do the live podcast as sort of a look back on the month that was for the season. And look, hopefully that means that we're sort of progressing up the table and we can talk about plenty of wins down in League One. But look, thanks for joining me over the course of the season and again tonight, Dan.
No worries. It's I'd like to say it's been a pleasure chatting with you anyway.
Same to you, yeah. And look, thanks as well, Logan. Thanks for joining us tonight and over the course of the season.
Yeah, the same thing. It's always good to talk about City. I guess if anything, it's a therapeutic self-help group.
Yeah, look, and hopefully we've helped those out there who've listened in over the course of the season. Look, if you're listening, if you're watching live, if you're listening on a replay, hit the like button, share the podcast around. It's always great to get new listeners and new viewers each and every season. We're always here to try and offer a slightly different perspective on City from the other side of the world with our Tigers Down Under podcast. But until next season, come on, City.